Listen, before I start telling you everything, I need you to stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share might sound unbelievable, but it's real. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You'll want to hear every detail of this. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 34 years old, and until a few months ago, I was just a regular guy working as an electrical engineer in a small manufacturing plant in Colorado. Nothing about my life was extraordinary. I lived alone in a modest rented house at the edge of town, commuted to work, sometimes went fishing on weekends, and spent too much time on the internet. I never thought my name would end up connected with something like this. But ever since that night, I can't sleep properly. I'm constantly watching the skies, and I know something out there knows me. Something out there is looking for me. It started innocently enough. One Friday night after work, I drove out of town to clear my head. I like night drives, they calm me down. That evening the highway was empty, the air was crisp, and the stars looked brighter than usual. About 40 minutes outside of town, there's a stretch of road with no streetlights, just endless fields on both sides. That's where I first saw it. At first, I thought it was a plane or maybe a helicopter, but the light was wrong. It was a perfect sphere of bluish-white glow, hovering silently above the fields. No sound of rotors, no blinking lights like aircraft are required to have. It just floated, matching my speed as I drove. My chest tightened. I tried to ignore it at first, telling myself it was probably a drone. But the way it moved, fluid, deliberate, it felt like it was watching me. I slowed down. The sphere slowed too. I sped up, kept pace. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My rational brain was screaming, "Turn around, go back home, forget you saw this." But something deeper, some instinct, told me this wasn't just curiosity. This was a hunt. The sphere shifted suddenly, darting ahead of me and stopping dead in the middle of the road. I slammed the brakes, heart hammering. The car screeched, headlights illuminating the glowing orb just floating there, maybe 15 feet off the ground. For a few seconds, time stopped. My ears were ringing, though there was no sound, just that glowing silence. And then, without warning, it shot up into the sky so fast it was gone in less than a second. I sat frozen in the car, breathing like I'd run a marathon. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was some experimental aircraft. But when I got home, that's when things became stranger. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up to a vibration. Not like an earthquake, more like a deep, resonant hum that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. My lamp rattled. The glass of water on my nightstand rippled. I looked out the window, and there it was again. Not a sphere this time, but a triangular shape, massive, blocking out a portion of the sky above my neighborhood. Lights underneath shifted slowly in patterns, like they were scanning. I wanted to grab my phone, to take a picture, but for some reason I froze. My body wouldn't obey me. I stood at the window, paralyzed, staring as one of those lights locked onto my house. It was only for a few seconds, but I swear I felt my chest vibrate, like my heartbeat was syncing with that sound. Then everything went dark. I woke up on the floor at sunrise. My phone was dead, even though I'd left it charging. Every electronic device in the house had reset, as if a power surge had hit overnight. But my neighbors, they didn't report anything. No one saw a damn thing. That was the first night I realized it wasn't random. They had chosen me, and from that point on, the feeling of being followed, tracked, hunted, it never went away. It didn't take long for the sightings to become a pattern, and patterns in my life as an engineer translate into data you can measure and analyze until you can't. For the next 2 weeks, I tracked every anomaly. Times, bearing, intensity of the hum, duration. I rigged a cheap dashcam to my car, put a motion-activated camera facing the backyard, and even taped a cheap magnetometer app to my phone. Yes, I know how that sounds, but I needed numbers. The devices behaved oddly. The dashcam would record perfectly until the object appeared, then the timestamp would freeze for a span of exactly 37 seconds before resuming. The backyard camera captured nothing but a ripple in the grass and a faint shadow. The magnetometer spiked like someone had brought an industrial electromagnet into the neighborhood and then dropped back to baseline. I asked for a transfer at work, started sleeping with the lights on, and began carrying a pocket knife because it made me feel less helpless. My coworkers joked at first, "Night owl, Daniel?" But when one of them found me standing at the plant's loading dock at 3 a.m. staring at the sky, they stopped joking. I found myself explaining things I didn't fully understand. The way the air would smell metallic for an instant like pennies and ozone, the taste of copper that would coat my tongue after the hum, the fact that my wristwatch began losing 30 seconds every night I saw the lights. I thought about telling the police. I went to the sheriff's office to ask if there had been any reports, and the deputy listened politely while typing with one finger and then told me there were no reports and handed me a pamphlet about sleep disorders. "Stress," she said. "Maybe talk to a doctor." I left feeling dismissed but oddly relieved. The official denial felt like a thin blanket I could hide under. But the blanket never lasted long. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of my dog. I had a beagle named Murphy, howling outside. I lived alone, remember? Murphy belonged to the neighbor 2 houses down, a retired schoolteacher who kept him in the yard during the day. At 2:42 a.m., Murphy started frenzied barking that went on for nearly 6 minutes. The sound cut through the night, and then there was silence so absolute it felt like someone had muted the world. I stepped outside in my bare feet and the grass was wet with dew. But there were no footprints, no scent of other animals, just a circular patch of crushed grass the size of a small car about 50 yards from my porch. The air in that circle felt colder, prickly against my skin like standing near a freezer. I took a photo and it came out as an overexposed white blur. When I magnified it on my laptop, the pixels seemed to smear outward like something had pressed against the image. I started sleeping badly. For hours I would fall into what felt like a dream and then snap awake with a memory that didn't belong to me. Corridors of soft light, a pressure across my chest, a voice speaking in tones that felt like meaning rather than words. Time began to erode. I'd lose chunks of my day, drive to work and be astonished to find I was already there, with no recollection of the route. Reach into my pocket and find my phone dead despite having charged it. Open the door to my house and find an unfamiliar smear of dust cleaned into a circle on the floor. My physical health also changed incrementally. Little scars appeared on my forearms, pale and parallel like fine surgical incisions, and I developed a sensitivity to bright light. My doctor ran blood tests and told me my white cell count was elevated for no clear reason. The specialist shrugged and suggested a mild autoimmune reaction or stress. The results were nonspecific and the paperwork, like the deputy's shrug, quieted the noise of my panic only briefly. Then came the night it stopped being sightings and started being contact. I was driving home from an emergency overtime shift at the plant, eyes heavy, the highway fogged with low clouds, when my dashcam registered a silent shadow crossing the road ahead. The headlights bounced off a surface that seemed both matte and reflective, and my engine died in a smooth, immediate sweep as if someone had turned a giant dial. I coasted to the shoulder and rolled the window down because I thought I'd smell smoke or fuel. Instead there was that hum again, low and structured like a chord some enormous instrument was holding. My phone lost signal. My instrument cluster went dark. For anyone else, that might have been the end of the story. Panic, a call to 911, a tow truck. For me, it was the beginning. A light bloomed in the fog beyond the ditch ahead, low at first, then spreading like spilled milk until it filled the world. It wasn't white. It was a layered blue with edges that seemed to breathe. I remember thinking, as an engineer, about power and energy and the impossible voltage that would be needed to light an area that way without any visible source. And then the light folded inward, converging on the road, and I felt an odd pressure at the base of my skull. My ears popped, and for a moment I felt weightless, like the way your stomach drops on a roller coaster, except it was my whole body. The next thing I remember is bright, immaculate light and the cold on the metal table beneath me. I could not see the ceiling, only a diffuse whiteness that made judging distance impossible. There was a taste of iron in my mouth. My clothes were different. My shirt had been unbuttoned and the stitching looked unfamiliar, like it had been repaired by a machine with a needle the size of a hair. I tried to move and realized my arms were restrained by bands that didn't press hard but held with a certainty that meant escape was pointless. Figures, if you can call them that, moved at the edges of my vision. They weren't the elongated caricatures from movies. They were smaller, more compact, and their motions were efficient and unervingly calm. My rational mind kept searching for explanations: trauma, hypoxia, a vivid hallucination. But something in their manner told me this was not an accident. A device approached my face, cold and smooth, and a soft vibration began at the point behind my left ear. Images, if I can call them that, poured into my head. A map of constellations I had never seen, the trajectory of my little town through one field of view, faces. Faces that were not mine but felt intimately familiar, like a lineup of people I had loved and forgotten. I felt them probing without touch, as if reading a script written in the chemistry of my body. I heard a voice then, not spoken but translated into meaning inside my skull. Do not fear. Preservation. Observation. The words were clinical, detached of malice, and yet the implication was clear. I was part of an experiment, a subject under consideration. I don't know how long I was under. Time became elastic. Clocks lost their authority. When I awoke on the shoulder of the highway, the car's engine was running again, fog rolling away like nothing had happened. My watch read 5:13 a.m. 3 hours had passed and my memory of them was a stitched tapestry of sensory impressions and the echo of that single translated phrase. My clothes were the same, save for a faint seam on the inside of my left sleeve where something had been surgically excised and reattached. I drove home in shock, pulled into my driveway, and sat unmoving for a long time. Murphy was asleep on his owner's porch as if nothing had happened. There were no burn marks, no melted grass, nothing the neighborhood cameras could reliably show. Only my dashcam had recorded anything, and the file, when I played it back, showed a smear of light and then a clipped section of nothing, an absence of footage that corresponded exactly to the time I had been missing. I knew, then, that whatever had taken me had the means to mask itself from ordinary detection, and that my life was no longer mine alone. I started documenting everything with a new intensity. I wrote down the words that had been translated into my head, even though I could not be sure I'd remembered them correctly. I taped the inside of my wrist where the scar tissue had formed. I examined the fabric of my shirt under a magnifier and found traces of an unfamiliar polymer that refracted light like crushed glass. The logical part of me, trained to solve circuit failures and identify component tolerances, kept insisting there must be a terrestrial explanation. But the visceral part, the part that woke me in the night with a cold sweat and a sense of being watched, whispered that it had been deliberate, that they had chosen me for reasons I could not yet see. I stopped going to work some days. I started driving different routes. I tried to confide in a close friend, Mark, who'd known me since college, but his eyes slid away as if he wanted to disbelieve me for me. Maybe you need a psychologist, Dan, he said finally, and I could hear the pleading in his voice. An attempt to rescue me from a truth he didn't want to hold. I knew I was losing the threads of normal life. I also knew, in the marrow of my bones, that whatever had reached into me once could do it again. I began to prepare not to run but to survive. I set up a network of mirrors around the house, attempted to create Faraday-like cages with whatever metal I could find, and did ridiculous things like lining socks with tin foil because it made me feel like I had at least done something. The next time they came, I was waiting, but I was also afraid of what waiting would make me. The preparations gave me a false sense of control, like I was fortifying my little suburban house against an enemy that could simply ignore walls, locks, or physics itself. Still, I clung to the rituals, checking the magnetometer app before bed, taping lines of salt on the windowsills, keeping a notebook beside me at all times. Fear makes you believe in strange protections. 3 weeks passed without a direct encounter. I almost convinced myself it had ended. But late one Saturday night, around 1:30 a.m., the hum returned, low, resonant, pulsing like a heartbeat under the earth. I was awake, sitting in my kitchen with every light on. The bulbs flickered in sequence, like dominoes falling, until only the dim glow above the sink remained. Murphy began barking again, frantic and desperate, and then his bark cut off with a yelp that sent a chill down my spine. I stepped to the window, and there it was. Not the triangular craft this time, but something closer, smaller, like a probe. It hovered just above my front yard, a sphere no bigger than a basketball, rotating slowly with a dull metallic sheen. Its surface reflected not the light around it, but something else, like images from a place I couldn't recognize. I should have hidden. Instead, I opened the door and stepped outside barefoot, trembling. The probe tilted slightly as if acknowledging me. I whispered, "What do you want from me?" The words sounded absurd in the night air, but I swear I felt an answer. Not in sound, not in words, but in the pressure behind my eyes. "You are marked." The phrase was not comforting. The probe zipped upward in a blur, vanishing into the black sky, and at that exact second, every mirror I'd set up inside my house cracked in unison. I didn't sleep. By dawn, I discovered a new scar. This one was different. A small circular burn on my chest, directly above my heart, about the size of a coin. It hadn't been there before, and it didn't hurt. But when I touched it, I felt a vibration inside my chest cavity, faint but distinct, like a tiny machine had been placed within me. Panicked, I drove to an urgent care clinic that afternoon, demanded an X-ray. The technician frowned at the film, left the room, and returned with a doctor who said the strangest thing. "Mr. Brooks, I think there's been a mistake. The film is overexposed in one spot right here." He pointed directly to the area above my heart, where the burn was. "It looks like an artifact, not your anatomy." I asked to keep the print. At home, under magnification, I noticed the blurred circle wasn't random static. It was patterned, lines intersecting, forming a geometric grid too precise to be noise. That night, I sat staring at it for hours until my eyes burned. I thought about going public, about uploading everything I'd collected, the dashcam files, the photos, my notebooks, but fear kept my finger off the upload button. Fear not of ridicule, but of escalation. If I exposed them, would they silence me permanently? Or worse, would they come more often? Instead, I isolated myself further. Mark stopped calling after I ignored him for weeks. At work, my supervisor wrote me up for absenteeism. Bills piled up, but none of it seemed real compared to the knowledge that something beyond us had placed a marker in me. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I drove far into the countryside, determined to confront whatever was happening. I parked in a field, shut off the engine, and waited. Hours passed. Crickets sang, the wind brushed the grass, and for a while I thought maybe nothing would happen. Then, just before 3 a.m., the stars themselves shifted. At least that's how it looked. One constellation bent, as if the sky had folded inward, and out of that fold, a massive object slid silently into view. This wasn't like the smaller crafts I'd seen before. It was colossal, blotting out entire sections of stars, and its edges shimmered like liquid metal. My body locked up with terror, but a strange calm washed over me too, like an animal resigning itself to the predator's jaws. The car vibrated. The hum rose to a pitch that made my teeth ache. Light spilled over me, and for a moment I felt weightless again. But this time I wasn't taken immediately. Instead, I saw them. Figures, dozens of them, stepped into the light. Not physical bodies in the way we understand, but projections, shadows given form. They surrounded the car without touching it, faceless but focused. In my head, voices overlapped, not words but impressions, layered meanings. Observation complete, integration pending, fear unnecessary. My pulse thundered. I shouted, "What did you put in me?" The voices fell silent. Then, A single thought pressed so strongly into me that it drove tears from my eyes. You will know when it begins. Before I could react, the light contracted and I was back on the empty road. Engine idling, dawn breaking on the horizon. My chest burned where the circular scar was, and beneath my skin the vibration had grown stronger. I didn't sleep that day. Couldn't. Every vibration beneath my skin felt like a countdown, a metronome ticking towards something I could not yet see or understand. I spent the morning moving through my house in a daze, checking mirrors, cameras, even the thermostat, as if anything could betray them. By noon, I realized I was avoiding the windows. The sky itself had become a threat. I drove aimlessly, nowhere in particular, but always watching, always calculating. And then it happened. I was stopped at a traffic light in the center of town when the hum returned, soft at first, then growing into a resonance that made my chest ache. Cars around me remained oblivious. The sky darkened unnaturally, a shadow passing over the sun in a way that made no sense with time or orbit. I tried to call someone, anyone, but the phones died instantly. Then I saw it. A craft descending silently above Main Street, massive, triangular, edges glimmering like molten metal. The people in the street froze, pedestrians mid-step, birds halting in midair. It wasn't hovering randomly. It moved deliberately toward me. A column of light descended, and before I could react, the vibration inside me surged, intense, unbearable. My vision blurred. I felt my body lifted, not violently but with an absolute inevitability. In a flash, I was inside again. The same white light, the same cold metal beneath me. Only this time, everything was different. The projections were gone. Instead, there were chambers, rows of them, with figures I could only describe as hybrid between mechanical and organic. Their movements were purposeful, surgical, and I felt no fear in them, only analysis. Panels slid down in front of me. Words appeared, floating in the air in a language I somehow understood. Integration required. You carry the sequence. You will remember. You are the conduit. My chest throbbed, and I felt it. The device beneath my skin, alive, pulsing, syncing with the patterns on the walls, the hum, the vibration. Images entered my mind. Galaxies, trajectories, other planets, all converging, all precise. They weren't just showing me, they were connecting me. I realized then that I was not merely observed. I was a part of something far larger, something beyond human comprehension. A presence moved closer, and I could feel thought brushing against thought. It was asking, probing, not with malice but necessity. My body tried to resist, but the integration had begun. I felt my mind stretching, boundaries dissolving, awareness extending. I knew my hometown, my life, my fears, all of it, would never return in the same way. And yet, somewhere deep, the man I had been screamed, desperate for normalcy. The light dimmed slightly, and I caught a glimpse of a familiar sensation. Time, linear and grounded, returning for just a heartbeat. I realized they had chosen to let me retain fragments so that I could understand, record, survive. Then the hum receded. I was on the highway again, the morning sun climbing over the horizon, the road empty and quiet, the car untouched, my phone buzzing with notifications from hours earlier. The scar on my chest pulsed faintly, warm now, and beneath my skin, the vibration persisted. A reminder that I carried something I could not remove. I drove home, the memory of the sequence still vivid, the language of thought still humming behind my eyes. I knew they would return, but I also knew something else. I had been altered. Not just observed, not just frightened, but changed, integrated in a way humans cannot fully understand. I made a decision. I would document everything, not for fame, not for disbelief, but as a record, a warning, and maybe, just maybe, a bridge between what is human and what had marked me. I speak to you now, the subscriber, the witness, because my life is no longer just mine. Every sound, every shadow, Every vibration might be them or a part of me. And I have learned that to survive, to retain some part of what I am, I must watch, record, and remember. Because they are patient, they are precise, and they are coming again. This is my story. Daniel Brooks, a man hunted, altered, and marked by something beyond the sky. I do not know what will happen next, but I do know one thing. I am no longer just human, and the world as I knew it has ended.